Yeah. Right. Yep, it should be. Yeah, it's recording. Fantastic. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of me trying to make the Dungeon Nerds podcast work. Today's subject will be Warhammer 40,000 for a noob. I am joined today by Midnight Wolf and Formous.
Hello.
Hello.
Formous, tell us a bit about yourself, your interest in 40k, everything like that.
I've been into 40k for a good few years now. More or less intend to play a lot of the video games. My first one being Dawn of War a few years back when I was 11 or 12.
Good game.
Yeah, it is. It's a great intro to the series.
Yeah.
Into the world if you haven't tried it before.
Yeah, definitely. Midnight, what about yourself? Well, I know what you like, but...
Yeah, no, that's fine. I joined a few years back.
So, yeah, the first thing to cover it really is probably the most, well, in my mind, is the most important and the best part of 40k, which is the lore. For those of you who don't know, obviously if you've come across this, you probably do know, 40k is a very old game, first released in 1987, and has obviously changed drastically over those almost 35 years of existence. And as such, it's like any in-depth sci-fi world made up by a bunch of lunatics in Nottingham. It's a bit of a mess. But that's kind of what makes it so, well, for me anyway, awesome. It's the sheer lunacy that you find within 40k. I mean, what's your guys... I suppose start with Formous, because you're the newest member to the podcast. What's your most favourite piece of 40k lore?
Honestly, my favorite part of 40k is how it's able to blend some of the craziest ideas out there for its ideas. For example, the super soldier that is the Space Marine, and then it blends that with realistic ideas and stories that make the whole thing a believable world. As such, it's a very drab and very dark world, but one with its bright spots that is somehow endearing.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to define 40k genre, to be totally honest with you, because it's not just sci-fi, it's not just fantasy, it's not just Lovecraftian horror or argument on theology. It's like a hodgepodge of all of them, but instead of being a brown disgusting mess, it somehow works and is really, really good to just see and enjoy as a world. There's something in it for everyone. I always maintain that with 40k. There's something in there for everyone. I mean, Midnight, I know full well what your favourite piece of lore is going to be. Before you even say it, I know what it's going to be. It's going to be the Orcs, the Baneblade, and the Deathstrike missile. And Formous,
yeah.
you know what?
Yeah,
you know what?
300 surprise door.
Yeah,
that was the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
When looking through pieces of lore.
Yeah, it was. I remember that it was a little entry in the 5th edition Guard Codex, which was my first army. I did Guard to begin with, and I remember. Pardon me. I remember telling you that, and you didn't stop laughing for like an hour because you just couldn't get over the wording of the over 200 rather surprised orcs. You just couldn't get over that wording. And
yeah, well, I'm really surprised that they were surprised, if that makes sense. I don't like.
It's one of
that was one of the funniest things I've heard in such a long time.
Yeah,
and it still makes me laugh today.
Yeah,
like.
And I mean, it's funny because obviously times have changed. I started off as a huge Guard fan. That was my first army, and it kind of evolved from there for me. And when I started learning more about the Space Marines, there's something as insane, like especially when you go in depth on the Space Marines and the explanation on every like organ that they have, like every special like how like their body changes. There's you get more in-depth writing for the Space Marine biology than you do for some stuff in Star Trek, which is known for its insane background stuff. And it's a classic case of good versus evil, but there are no good guys in 40k.
A clear example being the vampire blood angels.
Yeah.
One of the best guys around, but still drinking blood of innocent people.
My current army, known as the noblest forms of Space Marine out there, but they still have a thirst for blood, and sometimes it can, consume them. I mean, one thing I love is that the nicest guys in the galaxy are black guys in 40k.
And they also burn everyone alive too.
Yeah.
It's not that part.
But after they've burnt everyone alive that they're fighting, they save everyone. They'll stay behind. They'll refix their infrastructure. And it's not because there's no untoward things. It's just because they're really nice guys. That's all there is to it. Like, the only nice guys are the salamanders. Everyone else is just a tosspot, really, in comparison. And never mind. I mean, there's a different flavour of Space Marine to match everyone. There really is. Think of all the Space Marine chapters there are, just like the baseline founding chapters. And there's something.
Otherwise, we'd be here all day.
Yeah.
Naming them all.
Just thinking of those ones, and there's enough from the original 20 for everyone. Never mind the ridiculously overpowered Primarchs that led them, and I mean, there's so much to go into with the lore that this podcast is not sufficient to go into it by any stretch of the imagination.
The best thing to do is just, if you want to know more, is go and ask in the nearest Warhammer store.
Yeah.
That's like the best idea after dipping your toes into the ocean.
Yeah. Never mind.
Is to go find out how many fish are swimming.
And there's a multitude of excellent channels on YouTube that are entirely focused just on the lore of 40k, never mind the model building, but just on the lore. Whether that's Arch, who I know is controversial, but I enjoy his content anyway, even if I don't like the man. 40k Theories, which is really, really good. If you're looking for them...
Not to forget Luton, who produces long video essays on the topic.
Yeah, he's very good as well. If you're more interested in the rule side of things, Snipe and Wib is a good place to start, because they cover the rules for the game dating back to like Rogue Trader, like first edition, and everything like that, which is fascinating to see how much it's changed. I mean, I suppose another good question to ask is, okay, Formous, who's your favourite character in 40k?
Honestly, it would have to be Robuta Gilliman. The Ultra Smurf himself.
Yep, with the changes at Games Workshop and the effort they've put into making him an actual character, I completely agree with you.
He's a great character because he's essentially mini Emperor, to borrow a term I've seen other people use. Bringing him as an empire builder in the current Dark Millennium, with the Cicatrix Maledictum and more, and seeing his reactions to the changed world. And you have to mind that Gilliman's entire thing is about building up this empire his father had imagined, and even on his own have conquered 500 worlds, well beyond that of anyone else.
Yeah.
So it's got this sad tone to it almost, to kind of see his empire reduced to what it is.
Yeah. No, I can completely agree with you. Now, 21-year-old me wouldn't, but 29-year-old me definitely would. Midnight, who's your favourite character and why? 40k, not fantasy. No Vlad von Carstein here.
It's okay. There is a Nagash as well. there is just so many to pick from. But I reckon at this moment in time, it has probably got to be Magnus.
Yeah.
Mostly because I'm currently painting the guy. But, like...
He is also the Primarch of your favoured Legion. And,
Yes.
you know...
And the sheer size and the impression that he gives...
Plus,
you can feel it in the model. It's
also the case of, you know, the tragedy that is the Thousand Sons. Like, they were practically forced into being traitors due to the actions of others. And
yeah, you can put the romance novels away. Their story is amazing.
yes, it very much
can give you
is.
tears more than a romance novel.
Yeah, Prospero Burns was a bloody good novel, and it's very hard because I like the Space Wolves, but it's very hard to like the Space Wolves after Prospero Burns. Very, very hard. Despite the fact that you know they've been tricked into it and everything like that, it's a very. You see, you've both
horrible to listen to.
But you've both given me Primarchs, which are like probably the most famous characters from 40k for the fans. But for me, it's not.
I mentioned Primarch because more or less 40k is a story of humanity, and the Emperor and his Primarchs are at the center of that story.
I mean, for me, it's not a Primarch. It's not even a hero. Now, Formous, you'll know who I'm talking about. Then you'll know immediately who I'm talking about because I never shut up about him. It's Jago Savitarian, better known as Sevatar, first captain of the Night Lords and the biggest piece of shit in the. I mean, technically, he's not even 40k. That's the thing. He's heresy. He's 10,000 years before 40k is set, but he's got such a legacy and such a image and such a reputation that even in the 41st millennium he is still regarded with fear and awe by members of the 8th Legion, the Night Lords. Now, there's not many figures that can do that in the Traitor Legions, but like ones that come to mind are obviously Abaddon, Khan, Lucius the Eternal, but Sevatar being one of them, and being somebody that not only, you know, beat the greatest swordsman within the Space Marine Legions, but did it by cheating. Kind of just, he's just a fantastic and such an interesting character from a studying perspective, because there's so much more to him than meets the eye. His model is fantastic. He's badass as all hell. And I like witty, sarcastic anti-heroes. It's my, like, Achilles heel, if you will. But
one character I've been keeping an eye on will be Cypher, I think.
Yes.
Curious to see what his quest turns into.
I mean, Cypher for a long time has always been someone that's been very much in the background of the lore. He's been there, but he hasn't been a huge deal for a very long time. And for those of you who don't know, Cypher was a traitor of the Dark Angels, a legion that remained loyal, but he went traitor with some of them. And Cypher was the main focus. No, sorry, I'm talking about Luther, aren't I? Because I'm an idiot.
Yeah. Cypher is technically a fallen of the Dark Angels, but what makes him so unique, beyond his signature twin pistols, is that he carries the Lion's Sword.
Yes.
It is his goal to go before the Emperor and beg forgiveness. But no one ever trusts him, so he's constantly hunted and hounded.
Yeah.
Gilliman, in fact, after his resurrection, actually had him arrested in order for trial, I believe.
Yeah, because, well, bearing in mind, I mean, Midnight, you won't really know much about this, but there was a whole second Imperium where Sanguinius was the second Emperor, and Rebus.
I've dipped into that before.
Yeah, and
I
the
don't
Lion.
know, it's not my
This
big
was
area.
This was going on during the heresy, and they couldn't contact Terra, they couldn't contact Earth or the Emperor, and they assumed that the worst had happened and tried to continue the Imperium with Sanguinius as the second Emperor, Rebute assisting him, as like, you know, essentially his chief of staff in a way, and the Lion leading the military. That's why the Dark Angels weren't, you know, dicking around or holding back. They were actually doing something. And there was a whole thing between the Lion and Gilliman during that stage. And it's just, for a game that is practically about a bunch of 8-foot tall superhuman warriors with chainsaw swords running around stabbing each other and shooting each other with explosive bullets, there's a huge amount of complexity to just the politics of it.
Politics are always complicated.
Well,
to be honest.
unless you're the Inquisition, in which case you fuck everyone else over.
Right.
The time.
I know
Yes. Yeah.
The entire Badab War could be blamed on one Inquisitor. That is how bad they are.
The thing is that whenever, I mean, I haven't read a huge amount of Games Workshop's books concerning Inquisitors, but whenever I have done, they always tend to be the more mild ones, I've noticed. Like Ravener.
Well, the mild Inquisitors make better reading material, but they're also conveniently the guys who are so arrogant and prideful that they cause all the wars.
Yeah. and then you got people like Karamazov, a character I've mentioned to you, Formous, but you know as well, Midnight, because he used to be in your old. Just, I can't stand him. I just hate Karamazov because he's not complex.
I can't wait for the new model to come out.
I swear to God, if you ever field him, he's gonna get a las cannon to the face. I swear to God.
I love the fact how Karamazov is turned into the Emperor over in the Texas Speech Device show.
Yeah, you haven't. I think you've seen that clip, Midnight.
I've seen many clips of this.
Actually, another excellent show to watch for intro is If the Emperor Had the Text-to-Speech Device, because it teaches the lore of 40k in a comedy sense, and it's very well written.
Especially the Yu-Gi-Oh game.
Outside murdering, outside murdering Komarov with kindness. Apparently.
He's just sending him, yeah. And it's, you know, just, Magnus is a main character in that, and that's a whole level of hilarity in and of itself. You know?
Oh, it is.
To briefly explain the scene, though, for people who don't understand, when the Emperor had to kill Horus, he had to cast off a portion of his own psyche, his kindness, in order to do it. What this essentially manifested in is that his psyche is split. So the idea of the show is they took his kindness, put that in the worst Inquisitor possible, and then that Inquisitor got caught by the Dark Eldar. And it's just his kindness starts murdering the Dark Eldar.
That makes me so happy. they put the Emperor's kindness in that piece of shit. But, see, that's the kind of crap that I mean with 40k. You know, you get these characters that you despise so much. I mean, it's like I tend to have favourite characters in every army. Not just... I have an overall favourite, which is Savitar, obviously. He's my favourite character in 40k altogether. But when it comes to each army, I have other ones. Like for Chaos, my favourite character is Khan the Betrayer. Not only did he have an awesome model, but he's just got a knack, in games at least, for surviving complete and total bullshit he shouldn't survive. My favourite one for the Blood Angels is Dante. My favourite one for the Ultramarines is Uriel Ventris. I have favourite characters for each army in and of themselves. But I've spent so many years looking into this before I even started playing the actual tabletop game. And then playing the video games, which add even more layers to the universe. That isn't covered so much in the stories themselves for various reasons. And I mean, if you want a good entry to 40k, but you're more of a gamer than a reader or anything like that, Dawn of War is definitely the best place to start, because it's incredibly faithful.
Dawn of War's recreation of the varying factions and how they portray them and their interactions is probably one of the best out there. specifically. Dawn of War 2 is also really good if you're a Blood Angels fan. Or sorry, Blood Ravens, my bad.
Yes, don't mix the two up. The Blood Ravens are most definitely not Blood Angels' successors. They've been very clear on that.
I saw this hilarious meme where whenever the Blood Ravens show up, they filch and nick everyone's stuff.
Yes, there's one where Marnius Calgar is stood there, who's like a main character for the Ultramarines, is stood there and is like, and he's told, "Oh, we've just been reinforced, my lord. Ah, what glorious and noble chapter has reinforced us in our time of need. The Blood Ravens, lord." And he just goes, "Nail everything down." And just in the background, they're stealing a rhino. But they're not like jumping into it. It's just them picking up the rhino and running off with it. And it's just, I mean, some of the best memes are in 40k in and of itself. And
one of the classic ones is I want to hit them with my sword, and the guy is
oh
on a
yeah,
tank.
I'm pretty sure that actually comes from Dawn of War. That used to be a line that if you selected it was either the Chimera or the Lehman Russ, and it would just shout out, "Drive me closer, I want to hit them with my sword." And it just became a meme amongst the 40k community before even memes were really a thing. It was such a common...
Yes, that's one of the earliest ones I can remember, and one of the ones that just sort of stuck.
Yeah, and it summarises 40k really well if you think about it, because it's quite realistic in how it portrays its combat and everything like that. But bearing in mind that one of the main weapons that are used by the Space Marines is literally a fist with an electrical field around it. Never mind the chainsaw swords. Fists. Yeah, power fists. There's
ready for a fisting.
Yeah, there's the chain fist as well, which is another item that doesn't get shown much in the video games, but is essentially a more anti-tank version of the power fist. If you
there was a game called the Turner Crusade that came out a couple of years ago. Maybe some people are familiar with it. But one of the most popular melee weapons around was the power fist. So I remember this one time, the enemy team, one of them spoke up in the all chat and said that we should get ready for a fisting. Next thing we know, there's like 10 or 12 guys just running at us with fists.
well, one thing actually on that comment, there was a special character for the Imperial Fist called Captain Lysander, who had a thunder hammer, a special thunder hammer that his Primarch wielded apparently, that was called the Fist of Dawn, and it had a fist like on the haft holding the hammerhead, and the jokes that used to be made about that because it weren't an actual fist, it was just this hammer with a fist on it. And it's like what all girls truly dream of, that kind of joke.
Oh my
I mean, the humor in the 40k community can be twisted as well, but that's the nature of 40k. It's an incredibly grim and dark universe, and if you can't, and as anyone knows, if any of you have ever met someone that's in the military or has been in the military, you'll know they tend to have very, very dark humor or very grim humor. And that kind of
gallows humor.
Yeah, it shows in 40k massively because the focus is on the warfare. I mean, to quote 40k itself, it is the 41st millennium, and there is only war. Like that is it. There is only that. There's no peace. There's no prosperity. This ain't Star Trek, kids.
Well, there is occasionally peace. There's a misconception with 40k. While we do say that there is only war, reality is most of the galaxy and most of the planets and alien races are at peace most of the time. The Imperium, for example, you have worlds that are famously secure and prosperous as a result.
Yeah.
Sure, a lot of the border worlds are under threat, but it's not a rule by and large.
I remember there was an old quote when there was an expansion for the base game called Planet Strike. You might remember this, Midnight. fear us, for we are the Imperium of Man, and we measure casualties in planets, not people. And that really summarises the Imperium of Man. They don't measure like conflicts in lives lost. They measure it in planets lost. Or another way of putting it in material and productivity in a lot of cases lost. Like if a planet has a civil war on it or a major war, the Imperium doesn't care, as long as they still get their required like quotient of, you know, like guard regiments,
resources.
yeah, and everything like that.
It's called the planetary tithe,
yeah,
specifically.
As long as they get their tithe, they don't care what happens on the planet.
Essentially.
Yeah, and it's very rare cases that the Imperium will get involved. I can only think of one story where they do, and that was in one of the Gaunt's Ghost books, where they actually got involved. And then it turned out that it was a Chaos supported faction fighting, and they got even more involved and ended up beating them back. But I mean, I suppose that the greatest question is, what is chaos? And that's not such an easy question to answer in total. In my mind, it isn't.
The shortest definition is chaos is the dark reflection of humanity.
Yeah. To keep it simple, in 40k lore there are 4 chaos gods. You have Khorne, the blood god, Tzeentch, the changer of ways, Nurgle, the god of decay and corruption, and
the plague father.
Yep. And Slaanesh, the dark prince of pleasure. All of them have other names that they're known as, like Karnath, Tezen, Nuzrek and Slaanet, you know, all sorts of stuff like that. They're known as alternate names. But they are the core concept of it. And everyone has their preference, like Midnight, for example, favours Tzeentch because of a single line that I read to her once, that even if she loses, she's still won for Tzeentch. So that's her excuse straight away. That's why she's stuck to chaos ever since then. Even if I lose, I've still won. No, you haven't, Midnight. Yeah, I have. No, you haven't. Yeah,
I don't care.
Tzeentch, even if I lose.
In the eyes of my god, I win.
Tzeentch can lose. It's just Tzeentch has so many plans and whatnot that technically he never loses, but reality is he lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Khorne, being the blood god, Khorne does not care from where the blood flows, only that it does. He doesn't care if his followers win or lose, as long as blood is flowing, even if it is their own. Nurgle is corruption, pestilence, in all of its forms. I mean, he gave us a zombie plague in 40k, because of course there's zombies in 40k. Why?
The plague of unbelief. Yeah.
As well as many other things, such as the disgusting plague marines of the Death Guard.
Yeah, I dipped into Nurgle through painting. There is a whole story as to why.
Yeah.
He's also known as Papa Nurgle because he sees it as gifts for his children. He's not malicious in any sense, Nurgle. Unlike the other Chaos Gods, he's not malicious in any sense. He genuinely tries to be
cares.
The fatherly figure.
He genuinely cares about his followers, and because he views them as his children.
Not exactly. That's more something that he and his demons tell others. The reality is they actually only care that their followers wallow. They don't really care much more than that.
Yeah, true. And as for Slaanesh, well, you can tell by his nickname, the Dark Prince of Pleasure, that can mean multiple things. He/she is the god of excess in all things.
Slaanesh is she to the Eldar and he to the Imperium.
Yeah, but
it's unusual.
To apply a gender role to a Chaos God is in and of itself futile,
fruitless.
It's there is much thought and dreams and nightmare and emotion as they are actual beings. So to try and apply something like that is fruitless. I mean, the Elder called Slaanesh she who thirsts, which is one of the most badass names for an evil entity ever. She thirsts for our souls. So, but Chaos in and of itself is arguably one of the hardest concepts in 40k, and we're barely scratching the surface of 40k lore, and we'll never be able to go into full detail about it. Maybe in another podcast we'll cover individual factions a little bit more or something like that. But and to wrap up that subject in and of itself, for me it was the biggest selling point. The lore for me was the biggest selling point in 40k. For you, Midnight, I don't think it really was. For you, it was definitely more of the models. The lore and the fun stories were just like an added extra for you.
Yeah, there's so many in. I played a lot of 5th edition, and one of the parts of the Orc Codex is their counting system. It goes 1, 2, 3 lots.
Yeah, and you.
It's little snippets like that caught my attention.
Yeah. And as for you, Formous is more of like on the video game side of things compared to the tabletop. You got massively into the lore because the games piqued your interest from the sounds of things, and you wanted.
The games have a way of telling their stories that I think really kind of captivates the 40k setting.
Yeah,
it's like one of the in-motion books, as it were.
It makes you want to learn more. The games I've found and that's a good thing. That's kind of I view the games as like advertisements for the whole of 40k itself. So that's sums it up pretty well. But to move on to our next topic, which is kind of in the same reaches about what got us into it, is obviously the question is going to be a little bit different for you, Formous, because obviously you don't play the tabletop side of things. You are the video gamer here more than anything else, but for both of you it's your first armies or not necessarily your first armies, but not just your first armies but your first armies and your preferred armies, what led you to those paths. So I'll start with Midnight because I know your story very well. You started off with Orcs.
I did.
That was your first army. I remember our first game, me and you using the same army together against Space Marines and Imperial Guard, and whereas I moved on from Orcs onto Imperial Guard, you stayed with them for quite a few years, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I still actually have some of the old models from my original Orc army.
Yes, because we sometimes use them as bandits in D&D, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Despite having...
I still have they've broken across the years. I still have at least 2 knobs that are the older style. Yep.
One of my favourite things from the Orcs that their stronger boys are just knobs. Obviously short for noble, but it's just... But
Don't
yeah.
forget to protect your knobs, put them in power armor.
You stayed with knobs for about 2 or 3 years, and then you moved entirely to Thousand Suns.
Well, no, I originally moved to basic chaos.
Actually, no. I remember originally.
At that time,
no, you originally wanted to go with sisters, but sisters were all in metal at the time, and you wasn't about to fork out 50 quid for a 10-person box of sisters.
Yeah, but there was also the case of I didn't base any of the models at the time, and
metal was a pain in the arse to work with. So
yeah.
And but you did move to base chaos. I remember that, and I think it was.
Yeah,
I was
because at the time there wasn't any major Thousand Suns models. You had the upgrade kits.
Yeah, that was it. It was the upgrade kits. I think the only ones that had their own set were the old Khorne Berserkers models, were in plastic.
Yeah, because their heads were different.
And the Plague Marines were in
their
metal.
Stances.
Yeah.
The
Plague Marines were in metal back
of
then.
Where the pustules and things are.
But the Noise Marines for the Emperor's Children and the Rubric Marines for the Thousand Sons were metal upgrade kits. I remember that.
Yes.
And I think it was me that pointed out, because in old 5th edition, you could take all of them as troops choices, which meant you could take as many as you wanted. And I just said, why don't you just take Thousand Sons? They're the best ones here. And and that is where it came from. You took the Thousand Sons because they were the best. They were easily the best ones there. Expensive, but the best. That single line about Zinch always winning even when he loses, kind of sold it. Yeah,
but I had Warp Time. Like, you couldn't get anything better than Warp Time.
Warp Time,
Zinch.
Warp Time was the most broken psychic power in existence.
Like, that's what truly triggered me onto Zinch as a general.
Twiggered, seriously.
But I mean, for those of you who don't know, psychic powers are a thing in 40k. Instead of magic, you have psychic powers, but it's still very much used as magic for certain factions sometimes. And the power Warp Time in 5th edition, all you had to do was get under your leadership value, which for Chaos was an 8, on 2 d6 die. And by doing that, actually it was 9 for sorcerers, wasn't it? And by doing that, you got re-rolls for hits in close combat, wounding in close combat, armor saves, and invulnerable saves. Which was
all for 2 turns.
Yeah, and it was absolute bullshit, because I remember Eyebrows doing that all the goddamn time and me just being like, you arse, I want to kill him. And I remember one game I wiped out his entire army except his bloody Chaos Sorcerer. He just would not die.
No, they are horrible to get rid of.
And he tore apart my army, and I was just like, this is bullshit. Like, I lost because his sorcerer wouldn't die. Yeah, 5th edition was fun and totally not broken in any way whatsoever.
You ran into the boss fight from the books.
Oh yeah, don't. I mean, I look back on 5th edition. It's easily my favourite edition, but it's the one that I played the most of, and it was my first one that I started playing. So I think that's where it comes down to it. But even I look back on it and know it wasn't perfect. It had flaws in the system and certain mechanics that were a little bit too complicated than they needed to be.
I think the easiest thing out of it was templates. Like, how many things can you get under a template? Like,
it'd be the challenge. It was how much could you cheese a shot to get as many models under that big blast template as you possibly could. And then they brought out the Apocalypse ones that were the size of a dinner plate.
Oh my god, yeah.
That was
back when we could use the boy as a Reaver Titan.
So Formous,
that was a very interesting game.
Yes, it was. So Formous, obviously you don't play a tabletop game, but what's your favourite army and what was like?
So probably start with a little bit of history here. So when I first started playing Dawn of War, I was more or less just kind of all over the board. But the one that I really started to get and gain any kind of advantage with was surprisingly the Necrons. The Necrons' ability to revive, especially the Resurrection Orb, ended up being probably one of my top favorite parts of their kit. You could bring back entire armies in Dawn of War very, very quickly thanks to that device. And I annoyed friends quite often. And then I started learning other tricks as well with, for example, the Monolith in Dawn of War allowed you to teleport your basic soldiers around. So I would use the Monolith like a giant Trojan horse. And just teleport the army right into bases. I did that actually to Danny more than a few times.
Actually, in total honesty, that was something that was... I mean, Dawn of War did really well in my mind at showing 5th edition and 4th edition tabletop mechanics on the board game. Like, the units on there, especially in the first one, worked very similar to how they did on the tabletop. And that was a very common thing with Necrons. If you didn't have a monolith, then you needed to take a monolith with Necrons, because they didn't have a huge selection of units back then anyway. They do now. They're a massive army now, massively upgraded.
They had a really big issue when it came to heavy tanks and the like.
Now they've got a whole range of vehicles and flyers and everything like that. Much, much different from the Necrons of old. And I like the changes that have happened, but the old Necrons were also terrifying in their own right, because they were very much like T-800s. And I always like the idea of like these completely silent machines just getting up. And there's an old book that I read that's about the Death Corps of Krieg facing Necrons in a hive city. It's, you know, like unfeeling, uncaring automatons facing the Necrons. So, for those of you who know the Death Corps of Krieg, you'll get the joke. But it's a fascinating read, and the Necrons are truly terrifying in it, because they don't make any threats. They don't, make any speeches, or they didn't used to. They would just appear, destroy you, and either hang around or just disappear again just as quickly. Now there's a lot more to them, and it's kind of cool in its own right. But no, Necrons, playing them in Dawn of War like I did, and playing against them, it used to be such a nightmare to deal with, because they could completely break your battle line very easily. Because monoliths weren't an easy thing to crack. Never mind in the tabletop game back in 5th edition, but on Dawn of War,
they were horrible to play again.
Couldn't use melters against them. And because of their armor value, they were one of the toughest things on the planet, and they just wouldn't die. But no, that was a good army. What would you say is your favourite one now, though, Formous?
I would probably say it would be either the Imperial Guard or probably the Necrons still.
Yeah.
There's something about their endurance I just enjoy, and then the Imperial Guard's numbers.
The Hammer of the Emperor.
Tyranids are a close third. Yeah,
Tyranids
are a close third.
We obviously in the lore section we didn't cover Tyranids very much, but that's because they haven't got much in the newer lore compared to what they used to. So there's not much to say about them. But Tyranids as a concept are terrifying enough, and reading about them,
bugs.
They take all the nutrients from where they are and create bigger.
They take
stronger
everything. They take.
Tyranids.
Yeah, the longer they fight, the more they evolve, the more deadly they get. It's no, I wouldn't want to be in a gun line.
You're losing.
Yeah. Bravest Guardsman in the galaxy.
Tyranids are kind of a weird one. I find their lore is a little inconsistent, because honestly, I don't think they actually evolve all that much. At least personally.
I feel like out of all of them, Tyranid players have been the ones that have been the most shafted in recent years compared to all of the other Xenos factions. I know Demaster, for example, likes to complain a lot about the Orcs not being treated properly, and Eldar.
Oh yeah, they were your army of just throw a load of bits together and it works.
Yeah, that was for a long time. That was Tyranids. If you got a box filled with Tyranid spare bits, well, that's a creature in there. Get on it. That was the Tyranid army for a long time. If you've got a box filled with spare bits, make something of it. And I mean,
a load of the early possessed, the chaos were using like the Tyranid spare parts for their possessed models for a while.
Well, it worked for the mutations. Yeah, I mean those days have ended now. In total honesty, they're long and gone. But in the old days, especially in 5th and even a little bit into 6th edition, you were still getting like a lot of like custom bits made. I mean, I had, as an example of me, to go into myself, I mean, my first army was Guard and was very much by the books Guard, but then I did Space Marines, which evolved into a custom Blood Angels chapter, then Angels in Carmine, then Blood Angels proper. And I had a captain all through that came from the Masters of the Chapter set. He was a 10th Company captain. And, I mean, you remember Brother Captain Lumos Remin, don't you, Midnight?
Oh, yes.
And he looked nothing... By the time I'd got to finally just settling on Blood Angels proper, he looked nothing like what he had originally started as. He had an arm...
I think the legs were the only original piece.
The legs and the torso, because they were one whole piece. I changed his left arm for a wrist-mounted plasma pistol. I changed his right arm with a Grey Knight, for a Grey Knight wielding a Force Halberd. I changed the blade on the Force Halberd to the blade that came from the Furioso Dreadnought set, so I used it as a Thunder Hammer. It was drastically different, and I loved it. And that was completely fine, but that seems to get frowned on a bit nowadays. But I chose Guard originally because they were the most impressive to me when I first got into the game, because they were just normal dudes, you know, equipped with the weakest standard weapons in the game, that still were able to hold their own against these superhuman warriors and creatures from outside the galaxy and demons of the dark gods and all manner of horrors, and hold the line. Honestly, that's what sold the Guard for me. They faced all the same foes as the Space Marines and like these superhuman warriors did, with none of their advantages. And I thought that was cool as all hell. Personally, anyway. And I think that might have been the reason why you like the Guard so much, Formous.
I love how they can militarize. A fully mobile Guard army can basically trash an entire map in Dawn of War.
Yeah, and they can. That's exactly the same in the tabletop game. They used to be an absolutely lethal force on the tabletop to play against. And there was so many
of tanks.
Well, there were so many different ways that you could field Guard. You could field them all with very little infantry and nothing but tanks, like Eyebrows did. Eyebrows very much went for
that was a horrible gameplay to play against.
Yeah, because back then Lehman Russes used to be amazing, and you're just facing tanks, and they just wouldn't, because they had such strong armor.
Immobilize them. That's all you could do was immobilize the damn things.
In 5th edition, because of the law of averages, you was pretty much always guaranteed to just stop the things from moving, not actually kill them, unlike nowadays. And I lost so many games against him, learning against him. But then I switched to Space Marines. I don't know why I switched to Space Marines, actually. I think I just decided to give them a go. And then Blood Angels caught my eye. And, well, one, they weren't Ultramarines, because back in 5th edition, just mentioning Ultramarines was taboo in the community back in 5th edition. I mean, Formous, you've seen some of it, but it all boils down to a single article in a White Dwarf by the writer of the Space Marine Codex, Matt Ward, who was a massive Ultramarines fan, who just outright said in it, Ultramarines are the best chapter. And that pissed off every Space Marines player in existence. Because
it even irks some of the ones that actually played Ultramarines.
Because it was
just they knew they weren't.
No, because there's no such thing. The whole idea of a superior Space Marine chapter is in of itself a wasteful argument, because you can argue them all. I mean, salamanders care for the people in there that they fight for more than any other chapter. The Black Templars.
If there was any specific advantage to the Ultramarines or any of the chapters, you're gonna have to find it in their lore, and their lore is not generally how their faction plays.
No, not at all. So
I mean, you could argue the Ultramarines are the best, but that's only because they had Gilliman at their lead.
Yeah.
Without Gilliman, they're really just a well-known chapter with a lot of plaudits. That's about it.
In a lot of the lore, especially Horus Heresy, a lot of the arguments come from the only reason the Ultramarines are the best and do so well is because they're the largest legion. And that's before they became a chapter. That's why they're hailed as the best. Not because they are actually the best, but just because of how large they are compared to other legions. You know, they can spread out more than the others with less of an impact on their fighting capability. And
very much.
And I mean, Space Marine players are going to argue this until the end of time about who the best is. Even me as a Blood Angels fan and as a Night Lords fan, I don't actually think there is such a thing as a best Space Marine chapter in the lore. Rules-wise, there is always going to be some imbalance in the rules, and some chapters are going to be, or some Space Marine armies are going to be stronger than others because of whatever unit options they have or anything like that.
Definitely.
But in the lore, not at all. I don't think there's any such thing as a best chapter.
Unless you're playing Trazyn the Infinite. Shit.
Yeah, unless you got Trazyn, and it's just like, I've got all the best shit. Come at me. But I gravitated to Blood Angels originally just because I like the look of them, and I think that's another thing that can. I mean, there's no right way to pick your first army. Like, Formous, if you was to get in the tabletop game, what would be your first purchase, most likely, like your first starter set?
Probably, honestly, probably the Tyranids.
Yeah, I mean,
weird as that sounds, I would probably play the Tyranids. Frankly, it's just I love numbers or I love endurance. Is one of the two.
Well, if you're a Tyranids player, then get used to having no money in your bank account. That's all I'm gonna say, mate.
I know. I know.
Yeah,
that's actually probably the one reason.
Why you haven't?
One reason I'm not playing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cost. For me,
our last game against Tyranids, there was 105 models on the board for Tyranids and 70 of ours.
No.
Yeah, that was the 1,500 point game we had.
Oh,
with DVDs with buildings.
Oh God, how
many models did they have?
105.
Yeah.
To how many of yours? 40? 50?
70.
Yeah, but it was guardsmen.
Yeah.
Yeah, outnumbered with guardsmen. Like that was, and bearing in mind that was 50.
And
there was 50 standard guardsmen, one command squad. That was full.
A selection of snipers.
Yep. Some heavy weapons teams and some vehicles. 2 Lehman Russes, a Demolisher and a Standard, a Vendetta gunship, and a Chimera, and that it might have been just shy of no, it probably was about 70. You're probably right. But I was outnumbered with guardsmen against Tyranids, but that's just the amount of Hormagaunts that he had in total. One.
Yeah,
he had so many bloody Hormagaunts.
And the sci-fi regiment?
No, he didn't use that in that game because I wouldn't let him. Because I wasn't about to let him use a bloody Biotitan.
The only model I have painted that has actually drew blood from how sharp the spines are.
Yes. Well,
that is the only model.
No, that wasn't the Savitarian. That was the Trigon.
Oh no, that was the Trigon.
The Trigon.
See, I always get those two muddled up.
Well, I can understand why, because I mean, we haven't played a huge amount of Tyranid. We've only ever had one Tyranid player in our group, and he left the group.
Yeah.
So it's one of those, we know a lot about the Tyranids because they're around and nothing new has come out for them. So, but we've never really had to face them in newer editions because we've never had a NID player in the group. And we don't tend to play much at Games Workshop or anything like that, do we?
I wager when the new edition comes out, the Tyranids are going to get one hell of an overhaul. You should be careful.
I hope so, because Tyranid players deserve it. They definitely
Honestly,
do.
I wouldn't put any bets down for it.
I would hope that they would.
In all honesty.
Yeah.
It's a wish and a hope.
I'm also going to say this. You can paint your Tyranids any way you want. But for the love of Christ, don't paint them purple and then go, they're not Hive Fleet Leviathan, they're different. or purple and black, one of the most overused colour schemes for Tyranids ever, and everyone thinks they're being unique and special, and it's like, no, you're painting them the same as every other fucker that thinks he's being edgy. Stop painting them purple and black.
Purple and black are amazing colours.
Pick another fucking colour for your Tyranids.
They're already claimed, yeah. Yeah, don't go purple and black and pretend they're not Leviathan. They're...
I know Leviathan is purple and white, but you're not being special. You're literally... Stop painting them purple and black. Pick another colour. Paint them blue. Paint them green. I don't care.
For those who enjoy the Tyranids, however, there is actually a mod for Dawn of War that implements the Tyranids.
Yes, because they weren't in the first one.
They're scary. They're a scary force because eventually they can just start spitting out full strength platoons.
Yes.
Just left, right, and center.
Yeah. Mind you, the Apocalypse mod is insane by definition, to be fair.
I'm not talking Apocalypse. I wasn't.
I thought Apocalypse added them. Or is...
Yeah, Apocalypse did, but there's more than just Apocalypse to play.
Oh, fair enough. That's just the most famous mod for Dawn of War in it, so...
Yeah, it's not what I would pick for a new player, though.
No. Although, to be fair to Dawn of War, the vanilla game is so good. Pardon me. The vanilla game is so good for Dawn of War that the mods can add to it, but just playing standard can be so much fun to do. It honestly can.
Yes, agreed.
But I mean, one thing I've noticed, you might not have noticed this so much because you haven't played the tabletop formats. And Midnight, you haven't played a huge amount of the tabletop game yourself either, really, as more of a painter. But there are stereotypes around certain armies when it comes to the players themselves. Now, obviously,
exactly.
Stereotypes don't apply to everyone. That's the nature of a stereotype, but they exist for a reason.
Oh, but it's still fun, though.
Yeah.
Where they save out the people who are playing the varying armies. I gotta know.
Flat out, I will say this with absolute certainty, having played many of them over my lifetime. Space Marine players are the sorest losers on the planet. Now, I've never gone into a game expecting to win. I tend to go into most of my games expecting to get the crap beaten out of me, and I've always been pleasantly surprised when I win. But the amount of Space Marine players...
You ever heard of the Fire Angels, perchance?
Yes, I have, but I don't know much about them.
The sorest fucking losers you'll ever find. If they lose a battle, they will just call in their orbital monastery ship and just carpet bomb the planet with its weapons. Yeah, no, that is a perfect example of Space Marine players. Now, obviously, not everyone's like that. I know plenty of Space Marine players that can also be a huge amount of fun to play, and can give really in-depth games and can help you learn as it goes on. A perfect example I can think of is Eyebrows, for example. Someone that's actually willing to teach you tactics and everything like that, and is just really good if you're a noob to the game to play with. Probably the best person I've ever met to play a first game with. But then you've got other players. There are a huge amount of Space Marine players that try to cheat, or just outright do cheat. That if you take out, it's also a thing with dreadnoughts. I've noticed this. You've probably noticed this too at Midnight, but there's a massive thing with Space Marine players. You kill their dreadnought, they get very, very umpy. Yeah, for some reason, some of the people that we've played against are like, "Oh, we've taken out your dreadnought." It's like, yeah, and it's like, for me, it's the only one on the board. Of course, you're going to take it out. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a meme in and of itself. Dreadnoughts die in first turn. They're not fantastic on the tabletop. Awesome lore, fantastic idea. I love them to pieces. But I've every game I go into, I know that thing's dying first turn. It's too much for a threat to be left alive. I mean, never mind in close combat, but just in general, it's a nightmare to deal with. But Space Marine players can be very, very sore losers. Eldar players can be very arrogant.
They can also be like chill as all hell, but they can be slightly arrogant. They tend to have played for quite a few years, and it's not arrogance in a nasty way. It's just arrogance that makes you really want to hit them or just beat that ever-loving crap out of their army. Because you're just like, I will destroy your Craftworld Elder. I swear to God, I will obliterate them with my very essence. Dark Elder players are just weird, flat out weird. They have a weird sense of humour. They can be. I've met Dark Elder players that are absolute pieces of crap, and I've met Dark Elder players that are weird, that are the nicest people on the planet. But one thing that unifies them all is they are just weird. Orcs. Orc players tend to be the. You see, the Master is an Orc player, and
yes, he is.
He is. They can be terrifying to play against on the tabletop, because you'll try and use logical tactics when facing them, and they're not logical in the slightest, but somehow their bullshit still works. And to be fair to the Master, he hasn't won any games yet on the tabletop. He has, however, won plenty in Aeronautica. No, this isn't base 40k. But in Aeronautica Imperialis, 40k's spin-off dogfighting night aircraft game, he's won every single game he's played. Because I can't predict what the lunatic's going to do. I try and put actual aerial tactics against him, and he completely flummoxes me because he's just... I don't want to say an idiot, because that's playing to the stereotypes of orcs being idiots. But he is an idiot, and he's an absolute nightmare to play against. But also, in tabletop 40k, because of how much of a threat orcs can be, we will just hard counter him as much as we can, and he can never build up the momentum he needs. But all orc players tend to be very veteran players, most of them, who have played multiple armies and have a good core understanding of the game. They know orcs aren't the strongest on the tabletop, but they're the most fun because orcs are fun. And they tend to have fantastic scratch-built and painted models, and, are chill as all hell, and some of the most accepting people in the community. Orc players.
They're flying junk. They're moving junkyards on treads.
I know, but that's what's brilliant about them.
Yeah.
Guards players are either ex-military or don't like the idea of Space Marines being in bright blue power armor. Either or. that tends to be a Guards player. I fell into the ex-military and kind of the bright blue power armor when I first started off in 40k. But I've also met a fair few Imperial Guard players. Now, I don't know whether this is a local thing for me, but I've met a lot of Imperial Guard players that can be just as much sore losers as Space Marine players. It's like they have two stereotypes. They've got the ones I listed before, and also they like to think that they are the Duke of Wellingtons or Napoleons of the tabletop world, when they really aren't.
Yes. Their tactical influences are disgraceful.
Or questionable at best. It's like, who did you take lessons from? Stalin or Rommel? Because it definitely weren't Rommel.
You're just making me feel bad for the Master. The amount of times I've gone after him.
This is just it. I've trying to teach the Master a different way of playing orcs, being an old orc player. I beat him with his own army.
Yes, you did. That was
500 points.
Actually, no.
He took over my
Midnight.
1,000 point.
Midnight.
My 1,000 suns for a while.
That was your first solo win. I've just realised you have had a solo win.
It wasn't even my army.
But it hasn't been with an army of your own.
No, so it doesn't technically count.
Lose. One's got to win.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really love playing orcs. So if it wasn't for the Master taking them, I would have done something with them again.
Yeah. Chaos Space Marine players like Space Marines, but also want to enslave people to questionable business practices. So,
yes,
most likely they work for Asda, Tesco, Walmart, and want people to suffer as much as they do. So, that's a good point. I've always made a joke. You don't play Chaos if you're well off. Like if you're doing well for yourself financially, you don't play Chaos. That's probably not true at all. But I've always made a joke of you play Chaos because you like the idea that people are suffering more than you, and you're the one causing it. That's not true. It's just
the amount of times the master has told me that I really fit the envelope for Chaos. Now it makes a bit more sense.
Yeah, no, I can actually agree with that. But Tau.
You know me, Midnight, and you're agreeing. That's terrible.
Tau.
The world is coming to an end, guys. The world is coming to an end.
Well, Tau. There's two categories for Tau. You are either a Gundam player that really got lost, or a Gundam fan that really got lost, or see, Braze is going to hate that I'm saying this, but it's fucking true. Or you're a communist, and
oh my god. Well, no, that's true to an extent.
Yeah, there's no in between. You're either or. You are either the Gundam fan that got lost, or you are the communist. Those are the stereotypes. Obviously, I'm listing all these stereotypes off as a little bit of fun. If you like the look of an army, then that is more than enough of a reason for you to buy those models. It's like
definitely. If you love an army, play it.
Yeah, I love the concept of the Adeptus Mechanicus in the lore, but I can't stand the look of the majority of their model line. So I've never been interested in doing them as an army. Whereas, someone might be interested in doing Sisters of Battle or doing like Tyranids, because Tyranids do look sick. Their model line does look really, really good.
They are really amazing to paint as well.
But I mean, for me, it's more about the lore that attracts me. I mean, the only exception to the look of the models for me is the Adeptus Mechanicus, because I just really don't like the look of them. And I don't want to field Adeptus Mechanicus with other Imperial vehicles, seeing as they make the damn things. But there's no right or wrong way to pick a force. For some people, it's the lore. For others, it's the look of the models. It's each to their own. I mean, for those of you who aren't aware, Games Workshop produce more than just Warhammer 40,000. They also produce Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Now, I'm not going to go into a rant about how Age of Sigmar is worse than Warhammer Fantasy, because it'll be here for a couple of hours. But in Age of Sigmar compared to 40k, where I predominantly play Imperial or Loyalist factions, in Age of Sigmar, I tend to play, although I have an Empire army, I do Chaos for Age of Sigmar. In fact, to be precise, I'm painting up some Warriors of Chaos bright pink in service to Slaanesh. And it's purely because I like the look of the models in that. I think that they're awesome. I care very little about the lore in that section. But for 40k, the lore is so intrinsical to me that's what attracts me to armies more than anything else. The looks are secondary, unless they're really bad, like Admech. But whereas for Midnight, it's what can give you more the most challenging paint schemes, Yeah,
I am. Most afternoons, I will walk. Permitting.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I will take a look at what models are on offer and how I can paint them as a standalone thing, or as part of the army that I have. I do have a backlog of random models.
As a perfect example, you'll like this, Formous, but Midnight obviously has a predominantly Thousand Suns force. Now the Thousand Sons have obviously now changed their colour scheme in the lore, haven't they? At the time of the heresy, they used to be in red, but now they're mostly blue. Well, Midnight painted her Thousand Sons up red, and then went over it roughly in certain areas in the armour panels in blue, because in her own words, they've only just got the memo that the armour scheme's been changed. Like it's an office memo.
There is a whole lore set up to go behind all this.
Yeah, but it's
that is that they were in the warp and they escaped the rubric, but coming out of the warp, they are consumed by it now. Oh, they
escaped the rubric.
Hence,
well, it's more. You know how in the Eye of well, in the Eye of Terror.
I would point you at a bit of Thousand Sons lore if you're interested, Midnight.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So specifically, this is during the exodus by Yvraine and Guilliman from Cadia. What happened was Ahriman had cornered Yvraine and Guilliman inside the webway, and Ahriman had intended to capture Yvraine in order to learn her magic in order to try and, obviously fix the rubric. Well, as it turns out, she was able to reverse the rubric on Ahriman's rubric marines. And when they came back to life, they were so shocked, like they recognized each other and Ahriman, but they thought it was still before the heresy. Like they had just fled Prospero. So keep that in mind. You're going to be running, fixed rubric marines.
Yeah. Well, the idea is for
they're still loyalists.
Well, the idea is for Midnight's Warband is obviously in the Eye of Terror and in the warp, time flows differently.
Of course.
Well, for her warbands, the heresy only ended like at max about 100 years ago. It's still very much fresh in their minds. Or I think you settled on like 5 years or something silly like that, didn't you?
Yeah, it was a really little timeline.
They've just got back into contact with the rest of the Thousand Sons and have been informed of the colour change. And we're like, okay, well, we're going to have to find some blue paint. They had a short supply of it, so some of them have more blue on them than others because they didn't have a massive amount of it. That's her lore.
Admittedly, it did spark a whole big debate in our community of where they got the damn paint.
Yeah, one of the most important facets about 40k. Where does these Space Marine chapters get their paint from? Like, they're massive tankers floating through the void, filled with paint for passing Space Marine,
that
companies.
Would explain why the Orcs have so many different colours.
Yeah, they just
nab
capture
the paint truck.
Yeah, they just steal like Imperial paint trucks that are fighting around space.
Well, the painting is actually done by the Adeptus Mechanicus, or for the Space Marines by the Tech Priests, and they do that because they believe the Tech Spirit or Machine Spirit Space Marine power armor would get wily and antsy if its paint scheme was ever changed. That's why when you have like the Death Guard, how they always leave one pauldron the same color.
Yeah,
is because they believe the power armor would stop functioning properly, which is a legit concern in 40k, funnily enough.
Well, actually, there's a moment in one of the Ventress books where Ventress and his sergeant are fighting alongside the Grey Knights, and they'd lost their power armor, but there was some suits from another chapter on this planet, and they used those. And although the main body was painted blue, the helms were kept the original colour of the chapter that they were from, to respect the machine spirits.
Mm-hmm.
So
40k is really funny when it comes to the machines.
Yeah, it's a very weird subject when it comes to machine spirits, and explaining them in and of itself is a topic because there's a lot to it. But I want to move on from our armies onto like some of like the more specialist games that have come out over the years. I mean, I don't just mean the video games, although we'll touch on those. Obviously, I've played more of them than you have, Midnight, and obviously more than you have, Formous. But I mean, stuff like you've most likely heard of them, Formous, as much as Midnight has, like Necromunda, Battlefleet Gothic, Aeronautica Imperialis.
Gothic's my thing.
Yeah, you see, I I remember my first White Dwarf. Cadians had just been released in plastic, and they had just released the first Tau fleet, which looked horrendous. But what sold me in 40k was in that White Dwarf, and it wasn't a Space Marine model. It was technically it was. It was a Grey Knight strike cruiser. It just looked so sleek and shiny and silvery, and that's what sold me on 40k. And when the opportunity came up, and Eyebrows asked me, do you fancy giving Battlefleet Gothic a go? You were still able to get the models off a Games Workshop. Unfortunately, you're not able to anymore, and they are pricey. And we managed to pick up, he did a Space Marine fleet, I did an Imperial Navy fleet, and then we swapped fleets. And I took his Space Marines. No, he took my Space Marines because I started with Space Marines, and I took his Imperial Navy. That was a really, really fun game, especially if you was an Orc player.
There's a big red button.
Yeah, just silly stuff like that. It was a very silly game. Aeronautica is scaled down vehicles from 40k, a lot of them from either Forge World or from the existing lines, and it purely focuses on the aerial combat. That's a lot of fun because we've played a fair amount of that, myself and Demaster. Demaster has an Orc force painted up in the colours of his army, so he's got his Orc Airwag and in exactly the same colours as all of his other vehicles in his main Orc 40k army. They're just smaller.
So just get a couple of Hydras, you should be just fine.
Well, it doesn't have any land vehicles. Well, no, it kind of does. You get like air emplacements and everything like that you can deploy. But it's very much like dogfighting and everything. Huge amount of fun. Admittedly...
Yeah, the boy loves it. It's one of his favourite games.
Aeronautica. The boy loves Aeronautica. Midnight's waiting for Chaos to come out, obviously. Although I know you...
I have played a couple of games. I may have used the seen as special rule.
Yeah, because you use some of my stuff for Vulture gunships, despite the fact that I don't have the models for them, didn't you? But
I just wanted to see how they work, really. But that was a fun game.
Well, Space Marines have just been announced for Aeronautica, and I know you was thinking of taking some, like the Thunderhawks and everything, and fielding some of them for your Chaos Warband, weren't you?
Yes. Yeah. I can't wait for the Helldrakes. They are one of the favouriteest models I have in my Chaos is my Helldrake.
Well, they're just bloody mechanical dragons.
Yeah, don't upset Cookie and Cream.
Fuck's sake.
I genuinely named them Cookie and Cream.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, she has flying mechanical dragons named Cookie and Cream. In their first game, they torched a squad of Pathfinders. And then killed a Necron fighter.
A croissant, okay. A Necron croissant. I've never heard that one before, but okay, sure.
If you ever see the Necron,
it looks like one.
Necron aircraft, you'll know what I mean. Yeah, Cookie and Cream. But, and I know you're waiting for the Helldrakes to come out for that. But another game that is well known and well beloved, I've never really played it, and the group hasn't really been interested in doing it, is Necromunda, which you've probably heard of, Formous, because, well, a Necromunda game very similar to XCOM came out recently, and there's another one that's been announced which focuses on the bounty hunter aspect of Necromunda.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the bounty hunter one. Having your own little Mastiff is going to be a lot of fun. Yeah,
it reminds me a lot of
dog.
Reminds me a lot of Space Hulk Deathwatch, actually.
Deathwing.
Yeah, Deathwind, sorry. Reminds me a lot of that. But that's not a bad thing, because Deathwind was a really good game.
Yeah, it just needed more content, honestly. I think it would have been just fine.
But Necromunda...
Melee.
Now, for those that you don't know, Necromunda is a game that is set on the planet Necromunda, in one of its main hive cities, also called Necromunda, weirdly enough. And it is purely focused on the GAN warfare that occurs in the lower levels of this hive city. Now, a hive city is a massive think of the biggest city you can think of, like New York or Los Angeles, and then just stack another Los Angeles and then another New York, and just continue stacking multiple cities on top of it. And
I think that's the best one is the Doctor Who reference for that, because they have New York.
Yeah.
In one of the David Tennant episodes with Rose.
It's just
that's basically what it is.
And the lower down you go into a hive city, the more lawless it becomes. And very, very, I suppose a better example of it is Judge Dredd, with Mega City 1 and everything like that. That'd be a better example of it. Very much inspired by that. And you get all sorts of different GANs, like some that are just focused with, you know, the stereotypical stuff like people trafficking, gun running.
I love how Arch had described it. Is sometimes compliance actions committed by a hive city to, you know, deal with criminal elements was often to launch full-scale military invasions of the lower hive cities, and their whole goal is to shoot anyone you find, damn the costs, and then retreat later.
Yeah, no, that is very much a hive city. I mean, I've heard there's stories of hive cities being under siege, and the lower levels aren't protected at all by the PDF or like the Planetary Defence Force. But as they're taking it, they're having to fight the mutants and the Ganners and the abominations that dwell at the bottom of these hive cities. Like the stereotypical stuff, like massive radioactive spiders.
It depends on the planet.
Yeah.
A planet like Krieg would be defended on every level. Same for Armageddon.
Yeah.
But other places like Elysium would definitely be like that.
I view Necromunda as the stereotype for a hive city, if you will. That's the best way to explain it. It's a stereotype for what they're like. Not all of them are like that, but that's how a lot of them are viewed by the wider Imperium. Especially planets that don't really have hive cities on them, like say Tanith or Catachan. That's how they're viewed almost by the populace, because if they ever hear stories about a hive city. But even then, even within 40k itself, you have cities that are described as hive cities that aren't quite like that. You know, they haven't quite got to that level of building because they haven't existed for like the tens of thousands of years required to get to that size. Necromunda is a game that I've always found a relatively interesting piece of 40k lore, but I've noticed is not massively popular on the tabletop for varying reasons. It's something that I feel has been better served less by the models and more by the video games. Very much so in the video games. Now, branching on video games, I'm pretty sure, Midnight, you haven't really played much in the way of the 40k video games, have you?
No, I'm not a PC sort of player. Most of them are on PC, and I missed out on quite a few.
You didn't really grow up as a PC. Yeah, you didn't really grow up as a PC gamer, and a lot of the Xbox variants are more shooters more than anything else, like Fire Warriors.
And I am a terrible shot.
Yeah,
I outright admit I am a terrible shot.
He was good in Destiny, but you don't really have to aim in Destiny.
No, and I was quite happy being a sniper, so I'd just sit on the top of a hill and just snipe everything.
Yeah.
That seems like a paradox, if you ask me.
Yeah, it is. It wasn't reliable sniper cover if you was playing with her, I won't lie.
No, it was not.
It'd be more like you'd be fighting something and then she'd steal the kill and then you just hear over the microphone, "I hit it!" And but whereas yourself, Formous, you are much more the video gamer when it comes to 40k. So obviously you played Dawn of War. I'm from what you said before.
I have gone over most of the 40k games that have ever come out. Yeah. I actually have quite the library. One moment. Oh. So I have played everything from Dawn of War 2, its expansions. I have played Dawn of War 3, to my disappointment, Eternal Crusade, Inquisitor Martyr, Space Marine, Vermintide. Honestly, for 40k games can be good, but the problem that they have right now is there's been a lot of really crappy ones coming out too that are obvious cash grabs.
Yes. It's like they one thing that I noticed, they brought out an Aeronautica Imperialis one, but there was very little in the way of advertising for it. I had no idea it was coming out. The only reason I found out is because of a YouTuber I follow that's a 40k fan that does, you might have heard of him, he's called Remy, and he runs an armour unit that, the Cadian XX, or the XX, really weird way of saying it, and they do armour but 40k themed. He covered it. Otherwise I had no idea that it was coming out. Hands down, the best one in recent years has been Battlefleet Gothic.
Battlefleet Gothic has got to be one of my favorites. There is a modder for it called Skullgrim, who also creates a really good mod for the game as well.
Oh, nice.
But by and large, I have to say Battlefleet Gothic has to be my favorite in recent years.
I'll tell you what.
Just because of its details and how it functions.
If any of the games capture the true spirit of what it was like to play the tabletop version of it, Battlefleet Gothic nails it, because it is exactly from how you activate the powers to your movement to, I mean, obviously it's more in a real time sense than a turn-based sense, but that is very much how Battlefleet Gothic was to play on the tabletop.
Often, Battlefleet Gothic I think is obviously really good, but whenever I explain 40k to someone new, usually one of the first places I can turn, oftentimes, is probably Battlefleet Gothic, which is a weird choice. But when you're talking about, like, why would the Imperium destroy a planet, Battlefleet Gothic 1's Exterminatus cutscene has got to be one of the best, because it explains the point of heresy and what it can do, how hard it is to destroy, and often the final sanction against it. Yeah, and it isn't so much as a matter of it's like, wipe out that local cult. If you're lucky, you'll wipe out the local cult. But once demons start showing up, it becomes a real problem. You can't quite get rid of them ever again. And
for me personally, anyway, the ships in 40k, you can show some of the Space Marine, and a lot of people, when I've showed them that, have gone, oh, so it's like Master Chief from Halo. And it's like, kind of, but not quite. For me, the ships...
Master Chief's bigger, badder cousin.
Yeah. But the ships encapsulate 40k a lot more than anything else. It's like you can summarise pretty much every faction by showing off their ships in a way. Every faction. I mean, if you really think about it, like the Orcs, it looks like it's been literally hammered together with a mallet. It's like... How is that
at their rocks?
Yeah,
space hulks. Yeah.
How is that a void craft? How is that viable? The Imperium, or
I guess they stuffed enough corpses into the hole and eventually started working.
The Imperium, or as I like to call it, the floating cathedrals. Even the Space Marines are quite guilty of that.
The Imperium vessels, I think, captures a lot of the majesty and the size of the universe. When you look at these vessels, you realize they're more floating continent cathedrals, which in and of itself is something to consider. Yeah. But then when you think about how much space and territory that these fleets are required to patrol, you start to kind of gain a bit of a sense of just how desperate the Imperial Navy is constantly on the move.
Yeah. How spread thin they are as well.
Well, it's funny too about that is because the Imperium, technically speaking, has 3 primary super fleets. You have obviously the Imperial Navy and the Space Marines, but the second biggest in the galaxy is the Black Fleet, or the Black Ship Fleet. And they're the ones that go around collecting psychers all the time.
Yes.
But according to source material, even though we have no definitive number, they are considered to be rivaled only by the Imperial Navy in the sheer size, scope, and firepower that they have, and the fact that they operate out of a single large super base that is kept hidden from everyone.
Yeah. You can... And I love the look of the Eldar ships as well. It's the elegance. Even with the Dark Elder ones, it's the elegance that you get with them. The
Dark Eldar look more like poison barbs flying through space and elegant.
Chaos ships are always just older, well, for the most part anyway, are just older Imperial ships. And it used to be a thing in Battlefleet.
They are normally.
Yeah. And you used to be able to, in the tabletop version of Battlefleet Gothic, you could take all of the Chaos ships in your Imperial army. All of them. I think the only exceptions were the Terminist Est and the Planet Killer. Those were the only ones you couldn't take. For obvious reasons, because they were special character ships. But every other ship, you could, like the Murder Class cruisers, everything like that, because they were all Imperial ships anyway. So the idea is that they still have them in like mothball, and they can pull them out if need be. But the cruiser, like sailors are very superstitious.
Don't now, because either they can't make them anymore or they simply have lost them. Yeah. One of the oldest designs around, actually, funnily enough, is the Grand Cruiser design, which actually is older than even the Retribution class battleship.
Yes, like the Avenger class Grand Cruiser, which I had a model of, and I loved it.
You can generally tell the age of a class of vessel based on what its name means. For example, the Idolator is often a Chaos vessel, but there's still a few in Imperial service. But there is a Grand Cruiser which is definitively Imperial, but it's called the Exorcist. And all of these 30k names are generally, hunting demons, killing spirits, getting rid of gods, and so on and so forth. So you can generally tell the age of a ship by its name.
Which I also like. One thing I am glad that they did, because they didn't have models when you thought they would do, and they included in the games, was the Vengeful Spirit, which was the flagship to originally the Sons of Horus and then the Black Legion, and was used by Abaddon the Despoiler, and the Honour of Macragge, which was the flagship of the Ultramarines and Rebute Guilliman.
There is actually one ship that we have no model or pure description of that I really wish was around still, and that would be called the Imperator Somnium. It is the flagship of the Emperor himself, and is described to be so powerful that it dwarfed the big donut that the Iron Fists have. What was that thing called again?
Oh crap! I know what you're on about. Oh, what, the Phalanx? What, the Imperial
Phalanx? That was it. Yeah, it dwarfed the Phalanx in both its technology and otherwise. And I have a theory. I think I know who has it. I think the Dark Angels actually have it. And there's a reason for it. But we can talk about that later.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we've spoken about the Primarchs earlier on in the lore, and we're going to go into a bit now, because Battlefleet Gothic is one of my favourite parts. But each of the Primarchs had made for him a flagship that was based off of a similar file, or an STC, a standard template construct. And they were called the Gloriana class battleships. Now you probably heard of them, Formous. Each one was unique in its own right, but they also tended to have similar floor plans, layouts, everything like that. Some of the famous ones are the Vengeful Spirit, which was a Scylla pattern and the only one of its kind, Gloriana class. The Emperor had his own. It was called the Bucephalus. The Imperial Fists had one, but then it was given to the Black Templars, and it was called the Eternal Crusader. You had the Emperor's Children with the Pride of the Emperor, which is still under that name despite being a traitor vessel, which I love. The Dark Angels had the Invincible Reason. Each legion had their own one. The Thousand Suns, Midnight, just so you know, theirs was called the Photep. Although, by all accounts, Magnus barely used the damn thing.
To be fair, I would barely use the damn thing with the name like that.
Well, he named it. That's the thing. They named their ships. My favourite name for him was the Night Lords one, which was called Nightfall. But another one I also liked was the Space Wolves one, which was Harathnikel. I just really like that name. It probably means something in Norse, but I'm not fluent in Norse, so I couldn't tell you. But these were like ships were like 26 kilometers long, had crews in the hundreds of thousands as well, and could carry like 20,000 space marines within them. These were like truly massive warships.
Funnily enough, some of the lore for these things is that they're so large that oftentimes human crew get lost in the depths and form into their own primitive clans that are forgotten about for thousands of years, and eventually they're found and then killed by the local security staff.
Yeah, no, I've heard those stories, and I've always found them quite funny. I think there was a very, very old one where it was just like the I think like the engineering section declared itself a free kingdom and rebelled against the rest of the ship, and it started like a civil war in the ship itself whilst it was fighting a major battle, or fighting like a major campaign. This was going on in like this large battleship.
No one knew. It's just doing its thing, fighting the
as far as the rest of the fleet, as far as the rest of the fleet are concerned, and sometimes like even like the senior officers, everything's going along fine. The ship's still working absolutely fine, but there's like a major war going on between like two nations within the ship. It's the silly stuff like that which sells 40k for me as just a general concept. And
I think 40k is honestly at its best when it's able to refine its crazy ideas into a coherent story.
Yes, most definitely.
One of my favorites right now being Badab, or the Vrax series, both of which were told by, funnily enough. Outside that, Hell's Reach, which was animated and made into the movie, was awesome.
Yeah, using the man in question used the audio book, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He incorporated portions of the audiobook into the vocals, but then he hired some additional people to bring in and be other characters.
Yeah.
But some of the best scenes from that book are Grimaldus inspiring the guardsmen to fight, and some of the other supporting cast.
I look forward, for those of you that don't know, there is going to be a whole load of 40k animations coming out, and I can't wait.
Yeah, there was
they
one
do have
actually...
a range of kids' books at the moment.
They've
got a few sub-stories.
But speaking as someone who... I have children, and I've got a 2-year-old who loves Warhammer 40k already.
That's an unusual...
She I'll show her my models, and she's so excited to see them. I'll put on the animation teaser trailers, and she'll just be transfixed by them. She loves 40k. She just loves the look of it. She's well known for breaking fins as soon as she picks them up. Like, she's broken multiple fins of her mum's and everything like that. But she's so careful with my Space Marines. Like, they're delicate little babies in a way. She loves them. And now, Midnight, I know you haven't really read the novels, but have you read any of the novels, Formous?
I actually listen to audiobooks time to time when I go on long drives, which I probably will be doing soon enough anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'm the same. I've listened to a lot of the audiobooks, but I also have a fair few of the novels myself. One of my favourite series is the Night Lord's Omnibus. Now, I read that to her while she was in the womb, whilst my ex, her mum, was still pregnant with her. I read the stories that her mum would fall asleep, and I'd just carry on reading with voices and everything like that, because I'm weird. But I know full well that is not suitable reading material for a 2-year-old. Because it's about the Night Lords. Never mind everything else that happens in the novels. I mean, you know enough of the Grim Doctor, and you've heard the audiobooks. You can't let your kids listen to those. So for Games Workshop to do kid-friendly stuff, I'm actually all for that.
If they can do it.
Yeah, well, the boy has looked through one of the books, he's just started out into chapter books, so he's currently on all sorts. But he quite liked it. He got to about the 10th page and was just putting it down.
Well, I think the issue with the boy compared to somebody else who's fairly fresh is he's been kind of raised on stories, mostly from me, of much more of the grim dark stuff because he likes it.
Yeah.
I mean,
that is part of the issue, I think.
I mean, keeping on to actually going back to the subjects of specialist games, Formous, you might not know this. I think I spoke to you briefly about it, but we run a game of Black Crusade, which was a role-playing game released by Fantasy Flight, focused exclusively on playing Chaos. As playing as Chaos Space Marines and Chaos Cultists and everything like that. And the theme was everyone was on a Night Lord strike cruiser, and the majority of the characters we had were Night Lords, but we had a lot of people that knew absolutely nothing about 40k that joined us. And everyone else who had knowledge of 40k tended to pick different things. The Master, for example, played a Tech Priest. We had somebody else that played a Raven Guard traitor. Midnight, you played as a corrupted sister.
Yes.
But the boy wasn't allowed to play because he's only 7, and this was it was an adult game for us to just wind down and be evil. And he hated the fact he couldn't play.
He did. He would whine constantly that he wasn't allowed to play.
Because it was 40k and he loved it, and he was just like, but I know all of the bad things that happen in 40k. And was just like, yeah, we know, but you can't play in this. I mean, I think I mentioned it to you before, Formous, about the torture scene that happened with Midnight, where like all of the lads were cringing at it as she's describing what she's doing to this poor.
Oh yes, she came up with a new idea of leather crate making, I should say.
Yeah, and eye curlers and all the. Bearing in mind, it's like a table filled with lads, and it's been mentioned before. All cringing as she's describing in intricate detail what she's doing to this poor ecclesiastical priest, and we're just like, what the hell's wrong with you? Yeah, I think that's the closest like my character's ever. And bearing in mind, he's playing as like this cat. Like although I was GMing, I was running a character in it, mostly as like their go-to for pieces of lore, everything like that.
Midnight.
Yeah.
Midnight. If you want an idea for the next time, take your prisoner and put them inside a Chaos Dreadnought.
Oh God, no!
Oh, no.
That
is a good idea. But to be fair, I was asked to stop halfway through because the guys just couldn't handle it.
Yes,
they couldn't handle it at all.
Because you wouldn't stop. It went on for half an hour. But even then, bearing in mind, we had one lad that has no interest in 40k whatsoever. As far as he's concerned, it's not his cup of tea. He doesn't like it at all. He refuses to have any part of 40k. And we had another lad who knows absolutely nothing about it. Never played the video games, never got into it, nothing like that. Although he has started showing an interest in it. Join us. And they really, really got into it. Like, they were looking into the lore, they was playing to their characters. It was really, it was just huge amounts of fun. And a massive chill down from... There's nothing nicer than playing evil characters in an RPG when you're playing like good guys all the time in D&D and everything like that. There's nothing quite like being the bad guys for once. And I think that was the big selling point for a lot of the group in general. Just, you know, we're pirates. We're terrorizing the Imperium. We don't have to be good guys for this. We can do all manner of heretical things, and it was just a huge amount of fun to play and run for myself. And I know full well that you'll be pleased to hear this, Midnight, and both Braids and Eyebrows want to go back to it.
Yay! I can't wait. Yeah. I really can't wait for her to come back because she's terrifying.
She was best comeback ever. Oh, yeah, I'll look after her. If she gets hit by a stray bolt round, it's not my fault. Yeah, just remember, I've got the mind powers that can cause your head to explode, so just a thought.
I have an idea. I'm going to pitch to you at a later time, Reese. I think you're going to love it.
Yeah.
I want to see if you can ever pull it off.
Okay. Well, we're going to leave it there for now. Thank you very much for joining us. I've been Rise Inquisitor. This has been Formous and Midnight. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed talking about it. We will definitely be revisiting the universe of 40k in a future podcast. Next episode, we'll probably be going back to Dungeons and Dragons and covering the overall cultural impact that D&D has had over its many, many years of existence. Anyway, for now, that's us done. Thank you very, very much for joining us and checking us out. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave any comments or questions that you have down below,